Hi, and thank you for joining me for this webinar on ASCA School Counselor Professional Standards and Competencies Assessment and how that fits into comprehensive school counseling programs. I am Sarah Kirk, and I am happy to be with you all today as we continue our conversation about how to implement comprehensive school counseling programs in our schools. I work for the Student Support Division of the Oklahoma State Department of Education, and we are so excited to be closing in on these presentations about the ASCA National Model and comprehensive school counseling and how you can implement them into your schools. We have gone through a lot, and I thank you for joining me, and we are just about done. Today's presentation is about the School Counselor Professional Standards and Competencies Assessment, how that fits into the ASCA National Model, what it is, what the template looks like, and then we'll summarize. As always, we want to be aware that perfect can be the enemy of good. We are working towards comprehensive school counseling, knowing that it doesn't happen overnight. It's not meant to. It wouldn't be done well if we did do it that quickly. So keep that in mind as we talk about this component of the ASCA National Model. So like I said, we're going to be talking about those professional standards and competencies assessment. So this might sound familiar because we've talked about the ASCA School Counselor Professional Standards and Competencies already. That was in our define section, our define component. But now we're talking about the assessment that goes with these professional standards and competencies. It fits into our ASCA National Model in the assess component. We know that our ASCA National Model is made up of 4 components: define, manage, deliver, and assess. And together that outlines a comprehensive school counseling program that has a positive impact on student achievement, attendance, and discipline. When we implement school counseling programs, as the national model guides us to do, then our decisions are data informed. We're delivering student services to everyone, and we know that together this can improve student achievement, attendance, and discipline, which of course is our end goal. As I said, we have those 4 components of the national model: define, manage, deliver, and assess. And you'll see there in our yellow highlighted that today's presentation is about the assess component. And specifically, we're talking about the School Counselor Professional Standards and Competencies Assessment. You can see there that the assess component has several different pieces, and we're talking about one of them today. If you have questions about the other pieces, of course, you can check out those webinars as well. Looking at that define section, I did highlight in blue the ASCA School Counselor Professional Standards and Competencies, again, to make that connection that we already talked about these competencies, these professional standards and competencies that we have for ourselves that define our profession. And now down here in the assess component, we're just assessing for where we are according to those professional standards and competencies. So this is really a lot of what we'll talk about today. We already talked about when we talked about it in that define section. So just to remind you, the define component is made up of those student standards and then also those school counselor standards. We have 2 sets. We have the ethical standards and the professional standards and competencies. Those are the ones we follow. Then we want our students to meet our student standards. But today we'll be talking about how we assess for our progress according to the professional standards and competencies. All right. So just as a reminder, the assess component is just when we're figuring out the effectiveness. We're looking at what our students have accomplished because of our school counseling program, the improvements that have occurred, the success that has occurred, the positive outcome that has occurred as a result of our school counseling program. So we assess both our program in the assess component and school counselors. There's both pieces that need to be involved because we want to make sure our program is really strong, but we also want to make sure that individually as school counselors, we are really strong. So program assessment the assess component includes both program assessment, assessing the overall program, and that includes the school counseling program assessment and those annual results reports. And then the school counselor assessment and appraisal also has two pieces: the professional standards and competencies assessment that we're talking about today, and the performance appraisal that we're talking about in a different webinar if you want to learn more about that one. So the biggest way to distinguish between those two is the one we're talking about today is more of a self-assessment. It's a checklist that allows you to check and see where you are according to the professional standards and competencies. It does a couple of other things we'll talk about here in just a minute, but the school counselor performance appraisal is more for your evaluator. So your administrator, your evaluator that does your yearly or quarterly or whatever it is for you evaluations, that tool, the school counselor performance appraisal, is more for them. Okay, so to distinguish between that, I think a lot of people get those too confused. So we'll go over that a couple of different times. And then again, those other tools, the school counseling program assessment, that's for the program as a whole. And the annual results reports is really diving into your supports and interventions and what the data shows as a result of your intervention. So again, that's more program assessment. But today we're talking about school counselor assessment. So assessment of us. So the school counselor assessment, like I said, has those two pieces. The one we'll be talking about today, highlighted there in yellow, and then also the performance appraisal. But the reason that we do this is so that we can both self-assess and be appropriately assessed by our administrators that can inform our practices, that can better and strengthen our work as school counselors. We know that often we are evaluated and assessed and appraised using tools that aren't appropriate for school counselors. So these two tools are a great way to fill a gap that is there because we're often assessed and appraised as teachers, and that's not appropriate. So these tools are excellent to help create a better assessment, both for your self-assessment and the evaluation done by your administrator or evaluator. All right. So now let's dive into specifically this professional standards and competencies assessment. Again, one piece of the school counselor assessment and appraisal. This assessment, like I said, it's used to self-assess the school counselor's knowledge, attitudes, and skills. It's aligned exactly with those school counselor professional standards and competencies that are in our defined component. And the assessment allows us to self-report where we are in the acquisition of the mindsets and behaviors that school counselors need in order to meet our students' needs. It's a great way to see where you need continued professional development, where your strengths are, and to really self-assess what progress and what growth is needed in order to become a stronger school counselor. Like we said, when we talked about the ASCA School Counselor professional standards and competencies, those are to ensure new and experienced school counselors are equipped to establish, maintain, and enhance a school counseling program that addresses all three of those domains: academic, social and emotional, and college and career. The standards and competencies in this assessment are provided in assessment format so that practicing school counselors can use them to self-assess just as a quick check. I'll show you the template in a minute and you'll see just how easy it is. And then to make that professional development plan based on those results. School administrators can also use this tool when they're seeking to hire competent school counselors. It's a good way to interview you can ask questions based on this assessment. Again, this isn't used by school administrators to evaluate. That other appraisal tool would be used for that. So that school counselor performance appraisal would be used by an administrator to evaluate, but school administrators can use this assessment when hiring. And also school counselor education programs, our graduate programs, can use this assessment as benchmarks for training. So making sure graduate programs are covering each of these areas of the assessment is a great idea as well. Some of your graduate programs might have used this in that way, so you might already be familiar with it. All right. Oh, that just says that same thing, just in a little bigger format. So again, the school counselors can use this, school district administrators can use this, and our counselor education programs can as well. All right, so let's take a look, excuse me, at our template. Okay. So you can see here the ASCA School Counselor Professional Standards and Competencies Assessment. Up at the top, it just has that same thing we just went over, how school counselors can use this, how school and district administrators can use this, and how counselor educators can also use this. And then, like I said, it's just a checklist. So remember, this is Oklahoma's version. It's branded with Oklahoma's logo and all of that, but it's the exact same one that you can find on the ASCA website. And this one allows you to check what you which ones are true for you. Okay, so again, for practicing school counselors, which most of you probably are, this is mostly used just to self-assess, just for you to go through and see which ones you can honestly check. And then also where you have gaps, where there aren't checks, then you can formulate your professional development plan. So again, you'll notice this is exactly the same thing as our school counselor professional standards and competencies. We've got our 7 mindsets, and then we've got our professional foundation section, each of the things under the BPF. I love that they break it down into each competency. So we're not just saying, can you apply developmental learning, counseling, and education theories? Because that's so broad, that's a standard. And then those competencies here really help break it down. So you can see, okay, maybe I can do some pieces of this, but others I have areas for growth. So you can see here, it goes through the ethical principles, goes through our professional standards and competencies, our student standards, so making sure we're using those. And if we aren't, again, you don't check it. That's just a good guide for where you can continue to grow. All right, so then once we get past our professional foundations, we get into direct and indirect student services. So here is where you can go through and see which of those you are really strong in and which you have room to improve. Okay, really detailed, really good way to get a good idea of where you stand as a school counselor. Again, we're not striving for perfection. If you just go through and check all of these, that's not growing, right? We don't expect you to have all of them, and we don't expect you to be able to make huge changes right away, okay? But we can certainly, like this one, this is a perfect example, BSS4. Maybe you don't currently have a referral list, or maybe you do, but you realize you haven't updated it in a long time. Okay, don't check that, but have that as an area for growth. That's a great professional development plan or a professional development goal. All right, so then we get into the planning and assessment. So if you don't yet have a vision or a mission statement, then you wouldn't check those, but you can make it a goal and work towards that, okay? So this one's pretty long. It's a 10-page document, but again, I love how detailed it is because it really allows us to see what areas we need to grow. It's not so broad that it's not helpful. The really detailedness, I think, makes it a really effective tool to build a professional development plan. Okay. All right. So now that we've taken a look at that, and hopefully that makes sense and is easy to understand, let's jump back over and just finish up our presentation. All right, so we took a look at that template. Like I said, they can be found on ASCA's website, or that one I showed you was Oklahoma's version. If you're in Oklahoma, you can find that in our comprehensive school counseling framework. And so to summarize, the school counselor professional standards and competencies assessments can be used both by school counselors, by school administrators, and school counselor education programs. You, most likely as a practicing school counselor, will use it to self-assess and to make a professional development plan. And once you have done that, then you can really see your areas of strength and your areas you want to continue to grow. And yeah, that's it. This one's super easy and super helpful. So I hope you can see how this would be a beneficial component to add to your comprehensive school counseling program if you're not currently using this. Just to again reiterate, since all of these tools in the assess component can be a little confusing, the school counseling program assessment assesses the school counseling program. Okay, that assesses the whole program. Today, we're talking about the school counselor professional standards and competencies assessment. That assesses your standards and competencies. Then we also have the school counselor performance appraisal, which can be used by your administrator to appraise and evaluate your work as a school counselor. Right, those can be really confusing, but I hope that makes it clear. All three are great tools that have different functions. So be sure and check them out. Think about how you can implement them into your school counseling program, one step at a time. As always, if I can do anything to help, please reach out. My contact information is here. And that is all I have for you today. So I hope that that is helpful, and I will see you again very soon. If you have been working your way through all of these webinars, you are almost there. So congratulations. I hope you can see how different and stronger and better your school counseling program is as a result of implementing these different elements of the ASCA National Model to create a comprehensive school counseling program. Thank you for all you do to serve your students, and thank you for investing in yourself to learn more about school counseling. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.